Jake lived alone on the edge of a human colony, far from the main cities. His small home sat on dry, cracked land with nothing around but silence and sand. The colony was quiet, almost too quiet, just a few workers, a supply post in the empty desert beyond the hills. He liked it that way. No noise, no people, just peace. One evening, Jake was fixing the power line outside his house when a military vehicle pulled up. It was strange, he hadn't seen anyone from Central Command in weeks. The door opened and a tall officer stepped out wearing a black coat and dust-covered boots. "You, Jake Morgan?" the officer asked. Jake nodded. "Yeah, what's this about?" Officer glanced around, lowered his voice and said, "We picked up a distress signal. A Corellian ship crashed nearby, not far from here." Jake frowned. Corellians, that's alien territory. "What would they be doing here?" "Doesn't matter," the officer replied. "Just listen. If you see anyone, especially a Corellian, female, don't open your door. Don't help. Don't talk. One of them might be the sister." Jake raised an eyebrow. "The sister?"
Ow.
The officer looked serious. She's in heat. If she bonds with you, it's permanent. You won't be able to break it, even by law." Jake laughed, thinking it was some kind of sick joke. "So you're telling me a glowing alien woman might come knocking, and I should just ignore her?" "I'm telling you to stay alive," the officer said. "They're not like us. Their instincts take over. We won't be able to stop it." Then the officer left, and the vehicle disappeared into the dust. Jake went back inside, shaking his head. He thought about the warning as he cooked his dinner, but the whole thing felt too weird. Why would an alien ship crash so close? And what was all this nonsense about heat and bonding? Still, he made sure the door was locked before going to bed. Hours passed. Around midnight, the wind started to howl. A sandstorm rolled in, pushing against the walls of the house. Jake sat up in bed, listening to the sound of grit hitting the windows. He got up to check the power system storms sometimes, and knocked them out. That's when he heard it. A soft sound, scratch, scratch, like fingernails on metal. Jake froze. It came again, scratch, pause, scratch, then a low thump. He moved to the front. Door slowly, heart starting to race. Through the dusty window, he saw a shape, tall, thin, and leaning against the wall outside, he turned on the outside light, and that's when he saw her. She wasn't human. Her skin was smooth, pale with a faint silver glow. Long white hair stuck to her face, soaked from the wind and heat. Her eyes, wide and glowing blue, stared at the door like she was about to pass out. She held one arm tightly across her stomach, and blood ran down her side. Jake stepped back. Remembering the warning, his hand hovered near the lock. She raised her other hand and placed it gently on the glass. No words, just pain. Then her legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees. Jake's mind raced. "Don't open the door," the officer had said. "They're dangerous when in heat." But she looked so weak, so human in her suffering. He cursed under his breath. "Damn. It." Jake unlocked the door and opened it wide. Wind roared in. Sand hit his face, but she didn't move. She just looked up at him, shaking, her lips parting. Then she spoke. One word. In a language he didn't understand, and collapsed into his arms. Her body was burning hotter than any fever he'd felt before. Struggled to carry her inside, and shut the door behind him. As the storm raged outside, Jake laid her on the couch, unsure what he'd just done. The warning still echoed in his mind. But it was too late now. He'd left the door wide.
Asterisk.
Open asterisk. Jake watched her sleep. Her chest rose and fell quickly, like her body was running from something even in her dreams. The blanket he wrapped around her kept sliding off because her skin was too warm. Not just warm, burning. He dipped a cloth in water and pressed it gently to her forehead. Heat sizzled off her like a furnace. His hand flinched at the contact, but he didn't pull away. She looked peaceful now. But that didn't mean safe. All night, Jake stayed in the chair across from her, staring. His thoughts kept circling back to that warning, the officer's voice, repeated in his mind like a drum beat. Don't talk to her. Don't let her in. Don't let her bond. Yet here she was, unconscious in his living room, wearing what looked like a torn silver flight suit, glowing faintly in the low lights. Just before sunrise, she stirred. Her body twitched. Her eyes opened halfway. She looked straight at Jake. He froze. She didn't scream or panic. She just stared. Then slowly, she reached toward him, her hand weak, fingers trembling. She placed her palm on his chest, right over his heart. Her lips moved, but the words were too soft to understand. Then her eyes closed again. Jake sat there, confused. That gesture didn't feel like a threat. It felt like something else. Like a question. Like a test. He didn't know what it meant, but it stirred something inside him, something he didn't want to admit. After checking her bandages, Jake got up and made coffee. The storm had passed. Sunlight broke through the clouded windows, lighting up the dust still hanging in the air. He turned on his old translation unit and spoke into it. Identify species, female Corellian. Possible name? The device buzzed for a second, then replied, Subject. Is female of Corellian royal blood. Heat cycle detected. Emotional state unstable. Recommended distance. Hi. Possible name in local tongue. Syra. Jake blinked. Royal blood? He looked at her again, sleeping quietly on his couch, breathing soft and slow. Why would a royal sister be on a crashed ship? What the hell was going on? Searched through old data logs, public archives, anything he could access from his outpost. He found articles and translated records. Corellians had a complex culture. Females entered something called heat only once in their lives. During that time, they were driven by instinct to bond. If they locked onto someone, that bond was nearly impossible to break. In ancient times, it led to war. So strict rules were created. If someone let a female in heat into their home and didn't reject the bond by the third day, they were considered chosen by law. Across both human and alien systems, Jake felt the walls close in. He stepped back into the room where she slept. She had turned in her sleep. Her head now rested on the pillow, but her arms stretched out toward his empty chair. Later, that morning, she woke fully. Her eyes opened wide this time, alert and glowing like fire behind ice. She sat up fast, winced at the pain in her side, and scanned the room. Jake held up both hands, slowly. You're safe, he said. You crashed. I brought you inside. She didn't speak right away. Loved how she looked at him again, studying his face, like she already knew him. Then she whispered, in slow, broken English, You left your door open. Jake wasn't sure what to say. It was storming. You would have died out there. She tilted her head, but you were warned. His heart skipped. How do you know that? Syra didn't answer. She looked down at her arm, at the bandages, then back at him. You helped me, she said. Why? Jake walked to the other side of the room, needing space. He felt like her voice reached into places he had kept shut for years. You were hurt, he said. I wasn't going to let you die on my doorstep. Syra stood slowly, wobbly on her feet. You smell different now. Jake turned sharply. What? She took a step toward him, her eyes narrowing like she was trying to. Solve a puzzle. Before, your scent was just air and sand. Now, it smells like belonging. Jake took a step back. All right, listen. You need to sit down. You're not thinking straight. But Syra kept watching him. Not angry, not wild, just focused. If some part of her brain had locked onto him like a ship's sensor, like she couldn't look away, and somehow Jake couldn't either. He glanced toward the door. For the first time since the storm ended, it was wide open again. He didn't remember opening it, and Syra smiled. Jake barely slept the next night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard her voice, soft, calm, but strange. He replayed her words again and again. You smell like belonging? She had said it like a fact, like something obvious to her, but completely foreign to him. That idea unsettled him more than the heat of her skin or the glow in her eyes. She was quiet that morning. She sat at the kitchen table, sipping warm water, watching him like a cat watches movement. Her posture was still. Too still. Even when she blinked, it was slow and deliberate. Jake didn't know what to say to her. He'd dealt with lost cargo runners, drunk workers, even a few thieves in the past. But never this. Never someone who felt like she didn't belong to any world he understood. He tapped on his old datapad and pulled. More logs on Corellian females. The data was spotty. Some reports called them unpredictable during heat. Others described them as hyper-focused. One article said if a Corellian bonded and was rejected, it could cause something called burn withdrawal. Painful. Dangerous. Sometimes. Deadly Jake leaned back in his chair and looked across the table at Syra. "You're not going to die if I tell you to leave. Are you?" She tilted her head. "I don't want to leave. That's not what I asked." She paused. "If you force rejection, I will survive. But I will never be the same. Part of me will break." Jake swallowed hard. "If I don't reject you, then I become yours. By Corellian law, by instinct, by everything that makes me what I am." Her words weren't desperate, they were calm. Like she wasn't begging. Just explaining. Jake stood and walked to the window. Outside, the desert stretched on, endless. He saw the tracks of patrol drones far in the distance, dark marks cutting through the sand asterisk. Jake didn't want to admit it, but the silence between them had become something heavy. Not uncomfortable, not cold, just loaded. Deep. Syra didn't ask for anything, didn't demand his attention, but her presence was always there. When he ate. She watched him. He moved through the house, she followed, but stayed at a respectful distance. It wasn't creepy, it felt familiar. That morning, Jake sat on the back steps, sipping from a cracked mug. The desert stretched out like a sea of dead gold.
No.
Nothing moved, no patrols, no dust trails. He thought maybe the search had ended. Maybe they gave up. He heard soft footsteps behind him. Syra sat down beside him, her silver hair catching the sun. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, without looking at him, she said something that made his stomach drop. "It's the third day." Jake turned slowly to face her. She continued. "Corellian bond law activates after 3 full rotations. If you don't reject me by tonight, I become yours by law." Jake stood up and paced. "What does that even mean? Become mine? I didn't sign anything. I didn't agree to this." Syra looked up at him calmly. "You opened the door. You fed me. You sheltered me. You protected me. That is the bond ritual for our kind. Those are the vows." Jake laughed bitterly. "So I'm locked in for life, because I didn't want to. See someone die in a storm?" Syra didn't flinch. "No one forced you to do those things. You chose them." Jake ran a hand through his hair. "And what happens if I say no now?" "Then the bond shatters. I will feel pain. Deep pain. My body will survive, but something inside will not." Jake sat down again, more slowly this time. "What kind of messed up biology do you have?" Syra finally turned to look him in the eyes. "The kind that makes sure we never abandon those who care for us. We evolved to protect what matters. We imprint once. That's it. You are now part of me." Jake stared into the desert. He didn't know what scared him more, the idea that she was telling the truth, or the fact that part of him didn't want to say no. He went inside and pulled up the legal logs again. This time he looked deeper. He found an old alliance treaty. Humans and Corellians had agreed on joint territory laws years ago. There, in small print. It spelled it out in simple terms. Any human who accepts shelter of a Corellian in heat, without formal rejection within 3 cycles, is bound for life. Status permanent. Universally legal under both governments. Jake sat back. In his chair, the screen glowed blue in the dim light. The words stared back at him like a sentence he didn't see coming. He thought about his quiet life. This house. The silence. The comfort of no one needing him. Then he looked over at the couch, where she usually sat. She wasn't there. He walked through the rooms. No sign of her. The door was still locked.
Out.
No footprints outside. He moved faster, checked the storage shed, the old water tanks, even the signal tower. Then he heard it. A loud hum, faint at first, but rising. Patrol drones, coming fast. He climbed the ridge behind the house and saw them. 3 small black machines, moving like sharks through the sky. He followed their path with his eyes and saw where they were heading. A single figure in the open, SYRA. She stood in full view, hands raised, back straight. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. Jake didn't think. He ran. The ground burned. Under his boots, sand biting at his skin. The sun was high, hot and sharp, but he didn't stop. His lungs screamed for air by the time he reached her. "Are you crazy?" he shouted. She didn't turn her head. "They would have found me eventually." He grabbed her arm and pulled her down just as the drones flew overhead. One scanned the area, beeped, then moved on. The other 2 circled. Jake activated a jammer in his belt. The drones glitched for a second, then flew away. They stayed down for another 10 minutes, hidden under a rocky ledge. Jake looked at her, out of breath. "Why would you expose yourself like that?" Syra's voice was soft. "I thought maybe you didn't want me here. I didn't want to stay where I wasn't wanted." Jake shook his head. "You're impossible." She smiled slightly. "I am. Still learning what it means to be chosen." They walked back together in silence. That night, Jake stared at the clock. It was late, nearly midnight. The 3rd day was almost over. Syra stood near the door, her hands folded. She didn't ask for anything. She just waited. Jake stepped in front of her. He opened his mouth, then stopped. He looked into her eyes. They were glowing faintly again, but this time they didn't feel alien. They felt honest. "I don't know what this means," he said. "I don't know how to live with someone. I've always been on my own." Syra nodded once. "I can learn with you." He breathed in slowly. Then, without another word, he left. The door unlocked and walked into his room. SYRA followed a few seconds later. Jake woke up before sunrise. The room was dim, quiet, and oddly warm. Not from the temperature outside, but from the presence beside him. Syra lay curled at the edge of the bed, not touching him, but close enough that he could feel her breath steady and calm. Her back rose and fell in rhythm with his. For the first time since she arrived, he wasn't afraid, but that calm didn't. Last, the morning silence shattered when the sensor on the front door lit up red. Movement outside. Jake rolled out of bed and rushed to the window. In the distance, a dust cloud moved fast. Maybe a transport, maybe a drone patrol. But something military-grade and coming straight for them. Syra stood behind him, already alert. "They've found us," she said. Jake grabbed his bag and rifle. "Then we leave now." Syra didn't move. "You can still walk away." "You haven't told them yet." "If they question you, say you were held. Say I broke in." Jake looked at her like she had lost her mind. "You think I'd let them drag you off after everything we've been through?" She stared at him, unreadable. "You're not one of us. This isn't your fight." Jake slung the bag over his shoulder and checked his rifle charge. "Maybe not, but you're not just an alien anymore. You're someone I chose." They ran through the back entrance and climbed the rocky ridge that led to a narrow canyon behind his property. It was rough terrain, sharp rocks, and loose dust, but Jake knew every inch of it. He'd hiked it during supply runs, never thinking. He'd use it to run for his life. Syra followed without complaint. Her breathing was steady, her steps exact. She moved like she'd trained for this her whole life. By the time they reached the cave entrance at the edge of the ridge, the patrols were already circling the house below. Jake watched from above, heart pounding as the soldiers poured out. Of the transport vehicle, they entered the house with weapons drawn. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could imagine it. Orders, scans, commands to search every corner. "They won't stop," Syra said beside him. "They'll track heat signatures. They'll send dogs next." Jake shook his head. "No, they'll send the drones, cheaper and faster." Syra looked at him, eyes narrowing. "You know their patterns? I used to work for them. Before I got tired of pretending I mattered." Syra touched his arm, firm and steady. "You do matter. You proved it the moment you stepped outside the laws for me." The words hit deeper than he expected. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine echoed through the canyon. A patrol drone zipped overhead. Jake yanked Syra into the cave just in time. The drone paused outside the cave mouth, scanning the area. Jake clicked on his belt jammer again. A weak signal, but enough to confuse its sensors for a few seconds. The drone hovered, blinked red, then veered off. Syra looked at him with a mix of shock and admiration. "You risked a federal penalty just now." Jake shrugged. "Didn't know I still had that in me." Inside the cave, the air was cooler. Dust floated in beams of light from cracks above. Jake lit a small survival lamp and sat down on a flat rock. Syra sat across from him, arms wrapped around her knees. They were safe for now, but the silence stretched tight between them. Jake finally broke it. "What happens now? If we're caught, what do they do to you?" "Depends who catches me. If it's the regular military, they'll hand me to Chirelian envoys. If it's the Alliance officers, they'll try to erase the bond and study what's left of me." Jake shook his head. "They can't just rip people apart like that. They don't see me as people. They see a threat. A living weapon who bonded with a human." Jake stood and started pacing. He hated feeling useless. He hated knowing that all his tools, all his knowledge, couldn't stop what was coming. Then an idea hit him. "We need proof," he said. "Something that shows you didn't force this. That I chose." Syra raised an eyebrow. "And where would we find that?" Jake pulled a small camera unit from his belt. "This thing records biosigns during high-stress events. It would have recorded everything since the storm." He connected it to the survival lamp's power source. The screen blinked on. Timeline appeared. Heat readings, pulse rates, voice data, video footage, all of it backed up locally. Jake scanned through it and stopped at the clip where he first opened the door. He pressed play. There he was, hesitating, thinking, then unlocking the door. No sign of threat, no weapon pointed at him, just a decision. This might be enough," Jake said. Syra looked at him, her voice low. "Are you ready to tell the world you chose me?" Jake didn't look away. "I'm not hiding anymore." They sat together in the cave, waiting for nightfall, when they would head to the closest outpost and submit the evidence. The world had its laws, but Jake had made his choice long before anyone else got involved, and he wasn't going to run from it. Now, Jake and Syra moved carefully through the dark desert night, keeping low among the rocks. The moon was a thin crescent, barely lighting their path, but Jake knew every step by memory. The patrol outpost wasn't far, but every second they took made the risk heavier. If they were caught now, it could mean the end for both of them. They reached the edge of the camp and saw guards pacing near a chain-link fence. Jake crouched behind a boulder and motioned for Syra to do the same. Her silver hair shimmered faintly, even in the dark, but she moved like a shadow, silent and sure. Jake's heart raced as he checked the small device strapped to his wrist. The jammer was holding, but only barely. The guards were changing shifts, and he knew the timing had to be perfect. If he triggered an alarm, there would be no chance to explain. "Stay close," Jake whispered. They slipped past the perimeter, moving between shadows and avoiding pools of light. Syra's breathing was steady but controlled. Jake could feel the tension in her muscles, tighter than before, like she was holding back something deep inside. Inside the camp, the hum of machinery and quiet chatter made the world feel smaller. Jake led her to a small building where the communications and records were stored. He swiped a keycard he had kept hidden from his last job and pushed the door open. The room was cold and sterile, filled with blinking consoles and humming servers. Jake plugged the camera unit into the main terminal and watched as the screen flickered to life. The recorded footage showed everything. The storm, the moment he opened the door. Syra's pain and trust. "This proves it," Jake said, voice low but firm. "No threat, no force, just me choosing to help." Syra looked at the screen, eyes shining brighter than the monitors. "This is our truth." Just then, the room's door hissed open. Both of them spun around. Two soldiers stood in the doorway, weapons raised and faces hard. "Hold it right there," one of them said. "You're under arrest for harboring a Chirelian fugitive." Jake raised his hands but kept his gaze steady. She's not a fugitive. She's protected by the bond. The soldiers exchanged looks but moved forward. Syra stood tall, her body glowing faintly with that alien heat, eyes locking on Jake. The bond was no longer invisible. It pulsed between them like a living thing. Before the soldiers could react, the building's speakers crackled to life. The voice spoke clearly in the room. This is Commander Rel, Chirelian envoy. You will release the bondholder and cease all aggressive action. Jake felt Syra's hand grip his arm tightly. The soldiers hesitated, weapons lowering but not dropping. The command was official, impossible to ignore. The door opened wider and a tall figure stepped inside. The commander's presence was powerful and calm. His gaze swept over the room and settled on Syra. You, sister, are under my protection. And you, he said, turning to Jake, are now recognized as bonded partner. This alliance is final. Jake's mind reeled. The bond was no longer a secret or a warning. It was law, and they were stuck together for life. The commander nodded at the soldiers, signaling them to stand down. Then he looked directly at Jake. You chose wisely. Your courage honors both our peoples. Jake swallowed hard. The quiet man who had lived alone in the desert had become something else. A partner, a protector, bound by law and by something stronger than either could explain. Syra's smile was soft, real, and free of heat or danger. It was the smile of someone who had found a home. Jake took her hand, feeling the warmth and the weight of what came next. Together, they walked out of the building. The night air felt colder now, but full of promise. The war had been avoided. The bond was sealed. And their new life was just beginning. Asterisk. Jake stood at the threshold of his small house as the first light of dawn painted the sky. The air smelled of dry sand and hope. Beside him, Syra shifted quietly, her glowing eyes reflecting the soft colors of morning. The house was the same weathered walls, cracked windows, the broken door still hanging loosely on its hinges. It was a reminder of the night everything changed. Months had passed since the bond became official. The world around them had not stopped spinning, but for Jake and Syra, time had taken on a different meaning. They learned how to live together, two beings from different worlds, slowly building a life that was neither human nor alien, but something new. Jake remembered the warnings, the threats, and the cold faces of those who had wanted to keep them apart. He remembered the fear he had carried for her safety and for his own freedom, yet here they were standing side by side, stronger than either had imagined possible. Syra reached for Jake's hand, fingers curling around his rough palm. Do you regret it? She asked softly. Jake looked at her, really looked. The woman who had once been a stranger at his door was now the center of his world. No, he said with quiet certainty. Not for a second. She smiled, a smile that held the weight of entire galaxies and the light of countless stars. Then we are ready. Together, they stepped inside, and the house welcomed them, imperfect, but theirs. The broken door remained open, a symbol not of weakness, but of choice. The choice to keep their hearts and lives open, even when warned not to. Jake walked to the window and looked out at the vast desert. It was a wild place, untamed and unforgiving. But it had also become their home, a place where two unlikely souls found peace. Syra moved behind him, resting her head against his shoulder. Their bond was not just a law or instinct anymore. It was trust, respect, and a promise. The kind of promise that would outlast storms, outlast war, outlast the fear of the unknown. In that quiet morning light, Jake understood something he had never believed before. Some warnings were meant not to keep you safe by closing doors, but to test if you had the courage to open them, and he had opened his door. Because sometimes, the greatest risk was also the greatest reward. Together, they faced the future, not as alien and human, but as one.